The dust storm came roaring across the Arizona desert like the wrath of God Almighty, turning the afternoon sky the color of dried blood, and whipping the sand into stinging clouds that could blind a man at 50 yards. Jake Dusty Sullivan squinted through the driving grit as he secured the last of his horses in the shelter behind his adobe cabin, counting heads to make sure none of the Mustangs had spooked and run off into the storm. At 32, Jake had weathered more than his share of desert storms, both the kind that came with wind and sand and the kind that came with bullets and war paint. The Apache had taught him hard lessons about survival 10 years back, when they had taken everything that mattered to him, his wife Sarah, his young son Billy, and his faith in anything good lasting long in this harsh country. Now he lived alone on his small spread 30 miles south of Tucson, catching and breaking wild horses for the cavalry, and selling water to travelers fool enough to brave the desert roads. The storm was a bad one, the kind that could last for hours and bury a man's cabin in drifts of sand if he wasn't careful. Jake was just securing the last shutter when he heard something that made him pause, the sound of hoofbeats, barely audible over the howling wind. "What damn fool," he muttered, peering into the swirling dust. Through the brown haze, he could make out the shape of a horse and rider, both moving unsteadily toward his property. The horse was favoring its left foreleg, and the rider was swaying in the saddle, like someone fighting to stay conscious. Jake grabbed his rifle out of habit. Living alone in Apache country made a man cautious, and jogged toward the approaching figure. As they drew closer, he could see it was a woman, her dark hair whipping loose from what had once been an elegant arrangement, her clothes, expensive-looking, even under the coating of dust, torn and travel-stained. "Help!" she called out in a voice barely stronger than a whisper, her accent strange to Jake's ears, refined, foreign, nothing like the Mexican Spanish or broken English he was used to hearing from travelers through these parts. "Please, water." The woman slumped forward in her saddle, and Jake rushed to catch her as she slid unconscious from her mount. She was lighter than he'd expected, and as he carried her toward his cabin, he got his first good look at her face. Even covered in dust and exhaustion, she was beautiful, dark hair, fine features, skin that spoke of a life spent indoors rather than under the desert sun. But it was her horse that really caught Jake's attention as he led the animal to his small stable. It was a magnificent Arabian stallion, coal-black with white markings, the kind of animal that cost more money than most men saw in a lifetime. The saddle was hand-tooled leather with silver fittings, and the bridle bore markings Jake didn't recognize, but that looked suspiciously like some kind of coat of arms. "Who the hell are you, lady?" He wondered aloud as he settled the unconscious woman on his simple bed and went to fetch water from his well. The woman, girl really, she couldn't be more than 25, stirred as Jake gently dabbed water on her lips and forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of sage leaves, and she looked around the sparse cabin with obvious confusion. "Where—" she began, then seemed to remember her circumstances. "You helped me." "Thank you. Name's Jake Sullivan," he said, offering her a cup of water. "This here's my place. You were about ready to fall off that fancy horse of yours when you rode up." She drank gratefully, though Jake noticed she held a tin cup, like she wasn't used to anything that wasn't fine china. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, but that accent was still there, European, he thought, though he couldn't place it exactly. "I am Elena," she said, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I was traveling to California when the storm caught me. My horse went lame, and I became lost." Jake studied her face, noting the fine-boned structure, the way she carried herself even while lying exhausted in his bed. Her clothes, while dusty and torn, were clearly expensive, silk and fine wool, with tiny buttons that looked like they might be real pearls. This wasn't some settler's wife or saloon girl. "California's a long way from here, Miss Elena," Jake said, "and that's some horse you're riding. Arabian, ain't it? Don't see many of those out here in the territories." A shadow passed across Elena's face. "Yes, he was a gift. I call him Meridian." "Well, Meridian's got a stone bruise on his left fore, but he'll be right as rain with a few days' rest. Same goes for you, I reckon. You look like you ain't slept or eaten proper in days." Elena struggled to sit up. "I cannot impose on your hospitality, Mr. Sullivan. If you could just direct me to the nearest town." "Nearest town's Tucson, 30 miles north through country that ain't safe for a lone woman even in good weather. And with this storm, it'll be tomorrow before anyone could travel safe. Jake stood and moved to his small stove. You'll stay here tonight, and we'll talk about what comes next when you're stronger. I have money, Elena said quickly. I can pay you for your trouble. Something in her tone, desperate, like she was used to solving problems with money, made Jake look at her more carefully. Ain't about money, Miss Elena. Out here, we help folks in trouble. It's what decent people do. As Jake prepared a simple meal of beans and hardtack, he found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guest. Everything about her screamed money and breeding. The way she sat, the way she spoke, even the way she folded her hands in her lap. But there was something else, too, something that looked suspiciously like fear. You running from something, Miss Elena? He asked as he handed her a plate of food. Elena's green eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something vulnerable and frightened before she composed herself. Are we not all running from something, Mr. Sullivan? It was an elegant way of not answering his question, and Jake respected that. A man or woman had a right to their secrets, especially out here where the past was something most folks prefer to leave buried. But as the storm raged outside and Elena fell into an exhausted sleep on his bed while he settled down on the floor by the stove, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this woman was going to complicate his carefully ordered solitary life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He also couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Elena was running from, it was big enough and dangerous enough that even the Arizona desert might not be far enough to escape it. The storm would pass by morning, but Jake Sullivan's quiet life was about to be changed forever by the mysterious woman who'd risen out of the dust like something from a fever dream, bringing with her secrets that could destroy them both. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying, luxuries she hadn't experienced since fleeing the last civilized town 3 days ago. Through the single window of Jake's adobe cabin, she could see that the storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline morning with air so clear it seemed to magnify every detail of the desert landscape. Morning, Jake said from the stove, not turning around. How you feeling? Much better, thank you. Elena sat up carefully, suddenly aware that she'd slept in her clothes, torn and dusty as they were, and that her hair was undoubtedly a disaster. In Vienna, she would never have allowed even her lady's maid to see her in such a state, but here in this simple cabin, it seemed foolish to worry about appearances. Jake turned with a plate of food and a cup of coffee, and Elena found herself studying his face in the morning light. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way that was completely different from the pampered courtiers she'd known in Austria. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his hands calloused from hard work, and his dark eyes held a depth that spoke of loss and survival. Your horse is doing better, he said, settling into the chair across from his small table. Stone bruise ain't too bad. Few more days and he'll be fit to travel. A few more days? Elena felt a flutter of panic. Every day she stayed in one place increased the chances that her father's agents would find her trail. Country between here and anywhere civilized ain't safe for a lone woman, Miss Elena. Apache been quiet lately, but there's always bandits and worse. Besides, he studied her over his coffee cup, begging your pardon, but you don't look like you know much about desert travel. Elena lifted her chin with unconscious aristocratic pride. I am quite capable of taking care of myself, Mr. Sullivan. Jake's smile was gentle but skeptical. I'm sure you are, ma'am, in whatever world you come from. But this here's different country, with different rules. Out here, pride'll get you killed faster than anything else. As if to prove his point, Elena tried to stand too quickly and swayed as dizziness washed over her. Jake was beside her in an instant, his strong hands steadying her. Easy there. You've been pushing yourself too hard, haven't you? When's the last time you had a proper meal and a full night's sleep? Elena found herself leaning into his strength, surprised by how safe she felt with his rough cowboy's hands on her arms. In Vienna, no man except family members would dare touch her, and even then only formally. But Jake's touch was careful, respectful, meant only to help. It has been some time, she admitted. Thought so. Well, you ain't going nowhere until you're stronger. I got work to do around here, and you can help if you want to earn your keep. I told you I can pay. And I told you it ain't about money, Jake interrupted gently. But if you're staying, you're working. That's how things are done out here. And so began the strangest 2 weeks of Elena's sheltered life. Jake put her to work on simple tasks at first, gathering eggs from a small flock of chickens, pumping water from the well, helping tend his horses. Elena, who had never done a day's manual labor in her life, approached each task with the same determination that had gotten her across an ocean and half a continent. She proved surprisingly quick to learn, though her early attempts were often disasters. The first time she tried to milk Jake's cow, she ended up covered in milk and nursing a bruised dignity, while Jake tried not to laugh. "It's not amusing," Elena said with wounded pride, wiping milk from her hair. "No, ma'am," Jake agreed, though his eyes were twinkling. "Bessie's just particular about who milks her. Takes practice." "In my country," Elena began, then stopped herself. "What about your country?" Jake asked gently. Elena was quiet for a moment, realizing how close she'd come to revealing too much. "Women of my station do not typically milk cows." "What station would that be?" Elena met his eyes, seeing genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "I come from a family of some means, Mr. Sullivan. I was not raised to work with my hands." "Well, you're learning fast," Jake said. "And there's no shame in honest work, no matter what kind of family you come from." As the days passed, Elena found herself settling into the rhythm of desert life. She learned to cook simple meals on Jake's wood stove, to tend the horses without spooking them, to read the subtle signs that warned of coming weather. More than that, she found herself enjoying the work, the sense of accomplishment that came from mastering new skills. Jake was a patient teacher, never mocking her mistakes or making her feel foolish when she struggled with tasks that were second nature to him. He showed her how to track the wild horses that sometimes came to drink it as well, how to identify the plants that could provide water in an emergency, how to read the vast expanse of stars that hung over the desert each night. "It's beautiful," Elena said one evening as they sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I never imagined anything could be so immense. Gets into your blood after a while," Jake replied. "All that space, all that quiet, makes a man feel small and free at the same time. Is that why you live alone out here?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Had a family once. Wife and son. Apache took them 10 years back, along with most of our neighbors. After that, I didn't much see the point in being around other folks." Elena felt her heart clench with sympathy. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrible. Was a long time ago." Jake's voice was carefully neutral. "What about you? You got family back, wherever you come from." Elena hesitated. "Yes, but we disagree about the path my life should take. That's why I'm here." "They want you to marry someone you don't fancy?" The accuracy of his guess startled Elena. "How did you?" "Seen it before. Rich man's daughter. Family wants her to marry for business or position instead of love. Tale as old as time, I reckon." "Yes," Elena said quietly. "Something like that." Jake studied her profile in the fading light. "Must have been some disagreement for you to come all the way out here to get away from it." "You have no idea," Elena murmured. As the third week began, Elena realized she was happier than she'd ever been in her life. The work was hard, the accommodation simple, but there was a freedom in this life that she'd never imagined. No protocol to follow, no servants watching her every move, no endless social obligations. Just the honest work of each day and the quiet companionship of a man who treated her like a capable person rather than a fragile ornament. She was also becoming increasingly aware of Jake himself, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled his animals, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. When he showed her how to properly saddle a horse, standing close behind her to guide her hands, Elena felt her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with the desert heat. "You're a fast learner," Jake said one afternoon as Elena successfully completed the milking without incident. "Bessie's taken a real shine to you." "She's a good cow," Elena replied, surprised to find she meant it. "You've changed," Jake observed. "When you first got here, you looked like you expected the world to bite you. Now you look settled." Elena considered this. "Perhaps because this is the first place I've ever been where I was valued for what I could do rather than what I was born to." Jake stepped closer, and Elena felt her breath catch. And what were you born to, Miss Elena? For a moment, looking into his honest eyes, Elena wanted to tell him everything. About the palaces and the titles, about the marriage she'd fled and the life of golden captivity that awaited her in Austria. But she also knew that such knowledge would change everything between them, would make him see her, as she'd been seen all her life, as a prize to be won rather than a woman to be loved. I was born to a life that wasn't mine to choose, she said finally. But here with you, I feel like I'm becoming who I was meant to be. Jake reached up and gently touched her cheek, his callous thumb brushing away a smudge of dust. I'm glad you found your way here. Elena, whatever you're running from, I hope you know you're safe here with me. As Elena looked into his eyes, she realized with a start that she was falling in love with this quiet, gentle man who'd given her the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to discover who she really was beneath all the titles and expectations. She only hoped that when the truth inevitably came out, their love would be strong enough to survive the revelation of just how far she'd fallen from her gilded perch to find him. The riders appeared on the horizon just after sunrise, 3 dark specks moving steadily across the desert landscape toward Jake's remote cabin. Elena spotted them first from where she was hanging laundry behind the adobe structure, and her blood turned to ice water in her veins. "Jake," she called. Try and keep the panic from her voice. "Company coming." Jake emerged from the stable where he'd been tending to a lame Mustang, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he kept nearby. In this country, unexpected visitors could mean trouble, bandits, hostile Apache, or worse. 3 riders, he observed, shading his eyes against the morning sun, moving purposeful-like. You recognize them? Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as the riders drew closer. Even at a distance, she could see the quality of their horses, the formal way they sat their saddles. These weren't cowboys or drifters. These were men on official business. "No," she lied, stepping closer to Jake. "I don't know who they could be." But she did know. She'd been expecting them for weeks, dreading the moment when her father's long reach would finally find her even here in the American desert. The lead rider carried himself with the bearing of a military man, and she caught the glint of brass buttons on his coat. Government officials, or worse, Austrian agents sent to drag her back to Vienna, and the marriage she'd fled. "Elena," Jake said quietly, noting her obvious distress. "If there's something you need to tell me." Before she could answer, the riders were close enough to make out clearly. The leader was indeed in uniform. Not American cavalry, but the distinctive dress of an Austrian diplomatic attaché. Behind him rode 2 men in civilian clothes who had the unmistakable look of professional investigators. "Good morning," the lead rider called out in accented English as they approached the cabin. "I am Captain Friedrich von Stauffer of the Austrian consulate in San Francisco. We are seeking information about a missing person." Elena stepped behind Jake instinctively, her mind racing. She could run. Meridian was fast and sure-footed. But where could she go in this vast desert that they wouldn't eventually track her down? "Don't get many Austrian diplomats out this way," Jake said carefully, his rifle held casually but ready. "What kind of missing person?" Captain von Stauffer reached into his coat and withdrew a photograph, holding it out for Jake to examine. The Baroness Elena von Habsburg, cousin to His Imperial Majesty Franz Joseph. She disappeared from Vienna 6 weeks ago under distressing circumstances. Jake took the photograph, and Elena watched his face change as he recognized the formal portrait of her in court dress, complete with tiara and the elaborate gown she'd worn to her last imperial reception. The woman in the photograph looked nothing like the sun-bronze, simply dressed girl who'd been sharing his cabin in his life. "Baroness," Jake repeated quietly, his eyes finding Elena's. "Von Habsburg. The young lady is of considerable importance to the Austrian Empire," Captain von Stauffer continued. "Her family is offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return." Elena stepped out from behind Jake, knowing the game was up. "How much?" she asked, lifting her chin with the imperial pride that had been bred into her bones. Captain von Stauffer's eyes widened with recognition and relief. "Your Grace, thank God you are safe. We have been searching for weeks." "I asked how much my family is offering for my return," Elena repeated coldly. 10,000 American dollars, the captain replied. your father, Count von Habsburg, has been beside himself with worry. Elena laughed bitterly. Worry about his business arrangement with the Duke of Brandenburg. More likely, worry that his carefully planned political alliance might fall through if his wayward daughter doesn't return, fulfill her obligations. Jake stood frozen, the photograph still in his hands, staring at Elena as if seeing a stranger. "Baroness," he said quietly, "your actual royalty. Cousin to the Emperor," Captain von Stauffer confirmed proudly, "and betrothed to Duke Heinrich of Brandenburg, one of the most eligible men in German society." Betrothed, Jake repeated, the word hitting him like a physical blow. "An arrangement made by my father without my consent," Elena said fiercely, her eyes locked on Jake's. "A man 30 years my senior whom I've met exactly twice, who views marriage as a business transaction and wives as decorative property." "Your Grace," Captain von Stauffer said firmly, "you have responsibilities to your family and your position. This adventure has gone on long enough." "Adventure?" Elena's voice rose with imperial fury. "This is my life. For the first time in 25 years, I'm living my own life." Jake finally found his voice, though it came out rough with hurt and confusion. "Your life? What about everything you told me? About being Elena? About running from a marriage you didn't want? Was any of it true?" "All of it was true," Elena said desperately. "My name is Elena. I am running from a marriage I despise, and everything I've felt here with you." "You're a baroness," Jake interrupted, his voice growing cold. "Cousin to an emperor, engaged to a duke, and I'm a horsebreaker who lives in a 2-room cabin in the middle of nowhere. What does that matter?" "It matters because you lied to me." Jake's composure finally cracked. "You let me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist." "I exist," Elena pleaded, stepping toward him. "The woman who learned to milk your cow and cook your meals and tend your horses, that's me. That's who I really am underneath all the titles and expectations." Captain von Stauffer cleared his throat impatiently. "Your Grace, we must return to San Francisco immediately. There is a ship waiting to take you back to Vienna, and Duke Heinrich is most anxious for the wedding to proceed as planned." "I'm not going," Elena said flatly. "I'm afraid you have no choice in the matter," the captain replied. "Your father has given us full authority to escort you home by whatever means necessary." Jake looked between Elena and the Austrian officials, his mind reeling. The woman he'd fallen in love with was one of the most high-born ladies in Europe, worth more money than he could conceive of, and betrothed to German nobility. The gulf between them wasn't just wide, it was unbridgeable. "Jake," Elena said softly, reaching for his hand. "Please, let me explain." But Jake stepped back, his face closing off. "Ain't nothing to explain, Your Grace. You're who you are, and I'm who I am. Oil and water, as they say." "That's not true." "It is true," Jake said firmly. "And deep down, you know it. You can play at being a ranch woman for a few weeks, but eventually you go back to your world. Women like you always do." The words hit Elena like a slap. "Women like me? You mean women with titles and money? I thought you knew me better than that." "I thought I did too," Jake replied quietly. "But I didn't know you at all, did I? I knew Elena, who needed help in the desert. I don't know Baroness von Habsburg, who's engaged to a duke." Captain von Stauffer stepped forward. "Your Grace, we really must depart. The Emperor himself has requested your immediate return." Elena looked at Jake one last time, hoping to see some trace of the man who'd held her so gently, who'd taught her to find strength in honest work, who'd made her feel value for who she was rather than what she represented. But Jake's face was closed, his eyes distant. "You better go, Your Grace. Your real life is waiting for you." "This is my real life," Elena whispered, but Jake had already turned away, with dignity born of 25 years of royal training. Elena von Habsburg straightened her shoulders and walked toward the horses the Austrians had brought for her transport. She didn't look back as they rode away across the desert, carrying her toward a ship that would take her back to Vienna, and a future she'd risked everything to escape. Jake stood watching until the riders disappeared into the heat shimmer on the horizon, then slowly walked back to his cabin to sit at the table where he'd shared so many meals with the woman he thought he knew. On the table lay the photograph of Baroness Elena von Habsburg in all her imperial finery, a constant reminder that sometimes, even in the vast honesty of the desert, people could be more than they seemed. And sometimes, that was the worst discovery of all. 3 days after Elena's departure, Jake Sullivan discovered that heartbreak was worse than any physical wound he'd ever endured, at least with a bullet or knife cut. A man knew where the pain was coming from and how to treat it. This hollow ache in his chest seemed to have no cure except whiskey, and he'd already learned that liquor only made the loneliness sharper. He'd thrown himself into work with desperate energy, breaking horses with recklessness that worried even his hardened Mustangs. But every corner of his small property held memories now. The well where Elena had learned to pump water, the chicken coop where she gathered eggs with such careful concentration, the spot behind the cabin where they'd sat watching the stars and planning a future that had never been real. On the 4th morning, Jake was surprised to hear hoofbeats approaching his cabin. His first wild hope was that Elena had somehow escaped her Austrian escorts and returned, but the rider who appeared was a lean man in his 50s wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal. "You Jake Sullivan?" the Marshal asked, dismounting stiffly. "I am. What can I do for you, Marshal?" "Garrett. Thomas Garrett out of Tucson." The Marshal studied Jake's face carefully. "I'm here about that Austrian lady who was staying with you, the Baroness." Jake's blood chilled. "What about her?" "She's gone missing again. Disappeared from the train, taking her to San Francisco. Austrian diplomat is fit to be tied, and the government's not too happy either. Seems this lady is more important than I first figured." Jake felt his heart start beating again. "When?" "Yesterday morning, somewhere between here and Flagstaff. Left a note saying she was going back to where she belonged." Marshal Garrett's weathered face showed grudging admiration. "Took some brass for a lady to jump off a moving train in the middle of Apache country." "She's out there alone?" Jake was already moving toward the stable. "In this heat, without supplies?" "That's what I'm afraid of. Now, Mr. Sullivan, I gotta ask, you wouldn't happen to know where she might head?" Jake was saddling his fastest horse, his mind racing through the desert terrain between the rail line and his property. Elena was smart and had learned well during her time with him, but the desert was unforgiving to anyone caught unprepared. "She'd come here," Jake said with certainty. "This is the only place she knows in the territory." "That's what I figured. Question is, will you help me find her before the Apache do? Or before she dies of thirst trying to walk 30 miles in this heat?" Jake looked at the Marshal with surprise. "You're asking me to help find her so you can hand her back to those Austrians?" Marshal Garrett spat into the dust. "Son, I've been a lawman for 25 years, and I've learned to tell the difference between someone running from justice and someone running from injustice. That lady ain't a criminal. She's a prisoner. But I also ain't about to let her die in my territory, no matter what kind of family trouble she's got." Jake swung into his saddle. "Then let's go find her." They rode hard toward the railroad line, following the most logical route Elena would take cross-country. Jake tried not to think about the dangers facing a lone woman in Apache territory, the hunting parties that still roamed despite the recent peace treaties, the desert itself with its hidden hazards, the simple matter of water in a land where the nearest reliable source might be 20 miles away. It was Marshal Garrett who spotted her first, a small figure moving slowly across a flat stretch of desert still 10 miles from Jake's property. Even from a distance, they could see she was in trouble. Walking with the careful, measured pace of someone conserving strength, her movements showing the effects of dehydration and exhaustion. "Elena!" Jake shouted, spurring his horse forward. She turned at the sound of his voice, and Jake felt his heart clench at the sight of her face. Sunburned, dust-covered, but lit with incredible relief and something else that looked remarkably like joy. "Jake!" she breathed as he dismounted and caught her as she swayed. I knew you'd find me. What the hell were you thinking?" Jake demanded, his fear coming out as anger. "Jumping off a train in the middle of nowhere? You could have been killed." "I had to come back," Elena said simply. "I had to come back to you." Jake supported her to the shade of a large saguaro cactus, while Marshal Garrett brought water. As Elena drank carefully, Jake studied her face, looking for the imperial hauteur he'd seen when the Austrians revealed her identity. But all he saw was a woman he'd fallen in love with determined, brave, and looking at him like he was her whole world. "Elena," he said quietly, "you can't stay. You know that, don't you? They'll just keep coming after you. Then we'll keep running." Elena replied firmly, "Jake, I've had 3 days to think about this. I know who I am now. Not the baroness they wanted me to be, but the woman I discovered here with you. I'd rather spend 1 year living honestly with a man I love than a lifetime of luxury with someone who sees me as property. And your family? Your obligations?" Elena's smile was sad but determined. "My obligations are to my own heart and conscience. As for my family, they'll find another way to secure their political alliance. There are always other daughters to sacrifice for business arrangements." Marshal Garrett spoke up from where he'd been politely pretending not to listen. "Miss, begging your pardon, but running ain't really a solution. Them Austrian fellows have the backing of the federal government. They'll keep tracking you down." "Then what do you suggest, Marshal?" Elena asked. Garrett's weathered face split into a grin. "Well, seems to me the simplest solution is also the most permanent one. Hard to extradite an American citizen, especially one who's married to another American citizen." Jake stared at the marshal, then at Elena. "You're suggesting we get married?" "I'm suggesting that if two people love each other enough to risk everything, maybe they ought to make it legal before someone comes along and makes it impossible." Elena looked at Jake with hope and vulnerability warring in her green eyes. "Is that what you want, Jake? To marry a woman who comes with more trouble than any reasonable man should have to bear?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, looking at this extraordinary woman who'd given up everything for the chance to choose her own life. Then he reached out and took her dusty, sun-roughened hands in his. "Elena von Habsburg," he said formally, "or whoever you want to be from now on, will you marry me? Not because it's convenient or because it'll solve our problems, but because I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone." "Yes," Elena whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Yes, Jake Sullivan, I will marry you. And I want to be Elena Sullivan from now on if you'll have me." Marshal Garrett cleared his throat. "Well then, we better get moving. I know a preacher in Tucson who'll perform the ceremony and won't ask too many questions about documentation. But we need to get there before them Austrian fellows figure out where you've gone." As they rode toward Tucson, Elena mounted behind Jake on his horse. Jake felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't experienced since losing his first family, the sense of belonging to someone who belonged to him in return. "You sure about this?" he asked Elena quietly. "Life with me won't be easy. I'm not rich, I'm not titled, and I'll never be able to give you the kind of luxury you grew up with." Elena tightened her arms around his waist. "Jake Sullivan, you've already given me something worth more than all the palaces in Austria." "What's that?" "The chance to discover who I really am, and the man who loves me for being exactly that person." 2 hours later, in a small church in Tucson, Elena von Habsburg became Elena Sullivan in a ceremony attended by Marshal Garrett and a handful of curious townspeople. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed his bride with the desert sunset streaming through the church windows, painting everything in shades of gold and promise. "Think them Austrians will give up?" Jake asked Marshal Garrett as they shared a celebratory drink at the saloon afterward. "Eventually," Garrett replied. "Government's got bigger fish to fry than chasing down one runaway baroness, especially now that she's an American citizen. Might take some time, but they'll find some other way to solve their political problems." That night, in a room at Tucson's best hotel, Jake and Elena began their life together as husband and wife. As Elena fell asleep in his arms, Jake marveled at the strange turns life could take. He'd thought his heart was buried with his first family, but this remarkable woman had taught him that love wasn't a finite resource. It was something that grew stronger when shared with someone worthy of it. "I love you, Elena Sullivan," he whispered into her hair. "And I love you, Jake Sullivan," she murmured back. "My desert cowboy who taught a lost baroness how to find her way home." Outside their window, the Arizona stars shone down on a love that had bridged continents and social classes, proving that sometimes the heart knows truths that the mind can't understand. And in the morning, they would ride back to their simple desert home, where a former baroness would milk cows and tend horses, and a solitary cowboy would discover that the best treasures were the ones that chose to stay.